So today I wanted to talk a little bit about Microsoft's direction going into this generation coming up, specifically the one with the Xbox Series X, and eventually we'll have the Series S announced. I know Phil Spencer doesn't like the whole idea of different generations of systems, but I mean, let's face it, a new generation is about to start, and things are a lot different now for Microsoft from 2013 to this console launch. Of course, with the Xbox One, it was an obvious split. It was pretty straightforward, and they tried to do some weird and wild stuff there, but they were focused on selling a box. They need to sell so many boxes so that they can get revenue from third parties, and then they can sell their first-party games, and it was much more traditional. Now we're going into this generation that's going to be starting, I think, in November, and it's a lot different. Microsoft, I think, has even moved their main platform away from the Xbox. In fact, I don't even think that's their main platform anymore. It's just kind of there to help you get to their main platform. And their main platform now, I believe, is Game Pass. That is their main money-making platform that they want to position everything around. Before, the focus was heavily on the Xbox in general, whether it was the original Xbox, it was the Xbox 360, it was the Xbox One. The box was made, and then everything was placed around it in order to try to help that Xbox succeed, so again, they can build some sort of user base that they can profit further off of. But now, it doesn't seem that way. In fact, they themselves have said that they don't really care where you play the games, whether it's on an older Xbox One or a Series X, a Series S, your cell phone, your PC. This thing will be in smart TVs eventually if xCloud actually takes off, and it looks like Microsoft's going to push it to the moon at least as much as they can. So yeah, the Xbox itself starts to just kind of become part of the crowd with the overall idea of Game Pass being held up. There was an interesting video that came across my feed recently, and it was from Alana Pierce, and she talked about, specifically after that Xbox event, that everyone was mostly arguing and talking about Halo and the Xbox and how powerful it was and all of this, rather than talk about how good of a deal Game Pass is. And it is. Game Pass at $15 per month is a phenomenal deal. I believe that's how much we paid for the Sega channel back in the day. Someone will have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like it was about that much. So the idea of Game Pass, the model for Game Pass, isn't new. It's existed for a while, but Microsoft is pushing it beyond limits that I've ever seen any company try to do a game subscription service. GameTap attempted something similar, but they didn't have the studios that Microsoft has now, and Sega, like I said, tried this in the past, but they didn't have the technology that Microsoft has now. Google's attempting to do their own streaming stuff, but once again, they don't have the studios that Microsoft has now. I don't even think Amazon, based on what they're putting out right now, is going to pose much of a threat to Microsoft when it comes to streaming either. So we have xCloud. That's pushing you towards Game Pass. We have, of course, the Xbox. That also is pushing you towards Game Pass. And that's why, as I see people talk about the quote-unquote console war, it doesn't make sense anymore. These three companies are doing completely different things. While I will say Nintendo and Sony have remained more traditional in the sense that they create a system and they create software that is very good for that system to sell, Microsoft, it's hard to really compare Microsoft anymore because people keep looking at how many Xboxes they're selling, but Microsoft really doesn't care about how many Xboxes they're selling. They care about how many people are subscribed to Game Pass, and that starts to bring up some questions, I think anyway, about the sustainability of Game Pass and if it really makes sense to go this route. See, when you have a subscription service, it starts to make more sense to make less games and make one game and then update it a lot going forward. And you don't have to take my word for it. That's literally what Microsoft is doing right now. We heard that Halo Infinite is going to be a 10-year project. They're not going to make another Halo game for a long time. This is going to be one that they build on constantly going forward. Sea of Thieves is also that. They took the number off of Forza, which kind of tells me they might go the same route with that one. I'm starting to think that Microsoft will continue to just load up on games as a service games for a few reasons. One, we've seen them make pretty good money on microtransactions with Halo 5, Sea of Thieves. I mean, it's worked for them with a lot of those different games, and I do think that is a way that they will look to Game Pass to get you in to the game and then maybe monetize you further. It sounds weird because that kind of is like what we would mention Ubisoft or EA to be doing, where they have microtransactions in games. Microsoft has tried to make it mostly cosmetic stuff, but it's still there. It's interesting to see this kind of thing from a first party, where we see Sony pushing out Ghosts of Tsushima, Last of Us, and then we just had Paper Mario from Nintendo, and we see a lot of these games from first parties in order to push hardware, but now Microsoft is in a position to create a lot of software to push a subscription service, which means they need a lot of quantity. I mean, that's really it. They need to continue pushing these games out because, for the most part, third parties aren't going to launch the same day on Game Pass, which is probably the reason that they made the Series X as powerful as it is, so that there is an option for somebody who wants the best quote-unquote third-party experience. You buy the Series X, right? That's the biggest thing there. So there is still an advantage with third-party games and Microsoft's console. But in order to load up Game Pass, they need to have a lot of games coming out very rapidly, and it probably makes a lot more sense for them to create one game, one time for the generation, like a Halo Infinite, right? Like a Forza Motorsport, and then just update it going forward. Most likely, Fable will be the same way, where it'll probably be a single-player RPG with online elements where maybe you can do co-op things, but I'm sure there will still be microtransactions and other stuff added in. And the way I see this is, instead of having to make another Halo game in 3 to 4 years so that they can continue to get people to sign up for Game Pass, all they do is create updates going forward and market those almost as a new Halo game, but a big expansion. Think of kind of what Destiny 2 has been able to do over the years. Now, I do wonder if there is a future where the Xbox is no longer needed. I think that would come if the internet somehow magically in the US and other parts of the world just became pretty much consistent. Like, everyone just had great internet, no problems at all. It was never turned off, anything like that. That would be an amazing future, first of all, right? But there's a lot of things that would have to go perfectly over the next 10 years for that to happen. So I do think a set-top box of some kind will probably exist for the next 20, 30 years anyway. And really, by the time cloud gaming gets to that point, I even think Nintendo and Sony will start to look at that and say, okay, maybe we'll look into doing some cloud-based stuff as well. Sony did sign a deal with Microsoft to look into that further. So, I mean, clearly both sides are taking a look at it. Nintendo's even said to their investors that they are mindful of cloud gaming and will continue to really, I guess, just evaluate the landscape when it comes to that. But Microsoft's already jumped on board with xCloud. If they can do things like have people with cell phones jump on board, or it will launch eventually on PC. So if you're somebody who doesn't even have a console, but you have a PC and you're like, oh, $15 a month, and they'll just stream it to my terrible office PC and I can play on my lunch break or something, you probably will sign up and become a subscriber for Game Pass, and to Microsoft, that's just another sign up. Now, my concerns around this really is that would the quality need to be there up to scale for something like what Sony and Nintendo have continuously put out? We just had Ghost of Tsushima come out. We had Last of Us Part 2. Last of Us took a long time to make. Does it make sense for Microsoft to create a big game like that is just single player, that will be played through and then it's done? Does it really make sense for them to make that, or does it make more sense for them to create games that will constantly update in this games as a service model? Because I kind of feel like they would just go that route, right? And then the other thing on top of that is, if these games are just part of the subscription, and it's not a big deal if it doesn't sell necessarily on store shelves because they're just trying to get more subscription signups, does the game have to come out super polished? I say that because we saw Halo Infinite. It really sounds like this game is not ready, okay? That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest takeaway I have seen from a lot of interviews and others. It sounds like this game could have used a little more time in the oven, and things like a ray tracing patch coming after release, just as an example, it doesn't scream, oh, we're done comfortably, plenty of time left, we'll go gold 2 months before. No, this thing is coming in, as Nate said on Twitter, it's coming in hot, okay? So that's another thing, though. If you're very confident and you have this subscription model, is this a situation where you put something there and it's like a we'll fix it later situation? And then on top of that, if you're a customer of Game Pass, would you really feel that let down because you're not buying these games? I mean, at the end of the day, you're paying $15 per month and you have a wealth of options for different games to just download. Really, so Crackdown 3, right? When they announced that their first party titles would be going to Game Pass, I believe Crackdown 3, I think, was one of the first ones where they were like, yeah, that will be there. That game was not good. Like, I downloaded it on Game Pass. I played through it. It's like, 7 or 8 hours to beat it or something. I checked the multiplayer. People stopped playing that multiplayer after like 4 days. But I got to the end of it and I said, all right. And I just kind of moved on and started downloading something else, right? So is there that incentive to push a high quality game if you know that your customer base or your subscriber base is going to be more apologetic because they're not paying as much? That's another thing that I see brought up. And you know what? I think that is a valid concern, that the game's quality will go down because they are more focused on quantity or even just fixing a big game over time. Like, are they going to release betas essentially and then fix it to where it's the final product while we're sitting there with it on our Game Pass subscription for like a year? But then there's also the opportunity for indie companies, because I've seen some indie developers say that they're getting good deals by dropping their game onto Game Pass because Microsoft is accruing money and using it to buy these exclusives technically for Game Pass, where it drops on Game Pass, you just download it, but on, say, another system, you'd have to buy it. Crosscode launched straight up on Game Pass. It was $20 on other platforms, and I have a strong feeling that Microsoft gave them a nice little check for that one. So there is an opportunity for these indie developers as well, which could be good overall for just gaming, because that indie developer will then take that money and say, well, we broke even before we even sold a copy, so let's go make the next creative game. Now, there was one part that Alana Pierce mentioned where she's very happy that this is happening because it is cheaper to get into games. And that is correct. It is. It's much easier to get into games than it was before, because obviously $15 a month and you can just pick whatever games you want on Game Pass, download them, play them. She mentioned that she wants other developers, other publishers to do this, and I kind of had pause on that for a second. We have some subscription models, right, already. And it's something to think about, a world of subscription services when it comes to video games. I think Microsoft can get away with it because they have xCloud and they're looking at just a massive number of signups. I think that's why it's going to work for them, because they can get people on board. But xCloud has to launch correctly. I don't know if other companies would be able to pull this off unless they had access to their own xCloud. They'd have to make a partnership with Microsoft of some kind, and then, oh, look, they're basically signing up for the Microsoft store to sell their games on that. So I don't really know how that would work out either, with subscription models all over the place. I don't know if I would want that. I like the idea of these companies all trying their own thing, because that means that while Microsoft may not be delivering that big 5 to 6 year AAA project that's just single player, Nintendo probably will. I'm seeing Sony do it a lot right now. So I can get that multiplayer Halo from Microsoft on Game Pass, by the way, if I'm concerned about how it's going to turn out. Not a lot of risk there. But then on the other side, I can go to any of these other companies, first-party companies, and kind of hang out and wait for the next Zelda or Metroid, right? Or Ratchet and Clank or Spider-Man. So I like the variety, and I don't think I would want a world full of subscription services, even if it would be cheaper to get in, just because I'd like to see what everyone can come up with on their own. But let me know what you guys think about this, as Microsoft moving kind of beyond the platform of theirs being the Xbox and more just being a service with Game Pass. Do you think it's the smart thing to do going forward for Microsoft? It's certainly different, and it does make the console war kind of obsolete when it comes to Sony and Microsoft, because Microsoft, like I said, doesn't even care. They would, you know what they'd rather do? They'd rather compare PlayStation Now subscription numbers to Game Pass numbers. That would be something they'd be more interested in comparing. But let me know what you guys think about this one down below. Make sure you like the video on the way out if you enjoyed the discussion and the talk and some of my thoughts on the direction here of the generation, and dislike it if not, and I'll see you guys next time.